Hello students, this module is going to discuss two concepts, tradition and modernity, which act as a framing device to understand Indian society. Now here the objective of this module is to understand the complex relationship between the concepts of tradition and modernity, to examine the difference between the concepts tradition and modernity, to understand the fallacies that are associated with the application of tradition and modernity, with the understanding of tradition and modernity, and to examine the overlap that actually exists in practical life between tradition and modernity. As far as the experience of modernity is concerned, it was the Enlightenment which pioneered the discourse on European modernity. In fact, according to Arjun Appadurai, the Enlightenment era of the European modernity declared as well as desired the universal applicability of the process. Now, classical theorists like Comte, Durkheim, Marx, etc., were concerned with the issue of social change. They were concerned with the issue of transition that was unleashed because of the onset of modernity in Western societies. But this assessment of social change was hinged on solely on the European experience of the process. As far as the modernization theory was concerned, its emergence in the 1950s, we already know that it tells us that modernization can be successful, or modernization will bring about a transition when traditional traits of non-Western societies, traditional values of non-Western societies would be given up when they embrace the Western forms of modernity. Therefore, modernity was held out to be a positively valued process whereby non-Western societies would come in contact with modern Western states, and they would realize their potential once they emulated the Western ideas of modernity. It is said in Rudolph and Rudolph specifically mentioned that tradition and modernity, these two concepts, were presented or were understood in a dichotomous fashion, in the sense that in relation to modernity, each of these concepts defined the other, where tradition was projected as or thought of as valueless, and it was thought that it would be ultimately superseded by modernity and the value system that modernity offered. This rendition, Rudolph and Rudolph say, was based on a misdiagnosis of tradition in the way in which it was encountered in traditional societies, and a corresponding misunderstanding of modernity as reflected in modern societies. There are several such conceptual differences highlighted by Rudolph and Rudolph, and we will take them up one by one. So, as far as the two concepts are concerned, local ties and narrow parochial judgments are considered to be the dominant values in a traditional society, while a modern society is said to be dominated by universal commitment and cosmopolitan attitudes. These differences, as you can see, are value laden, whereby the traditional is looked upon as limiting and the modern is looked upon as cosmopolitan and positive, affirming. The other aspect of difference is the primary unit of society, as far as traditional societies are concerned, is said to be the collective, is said to be the group which is said to be primary, over the individual who is accorded primacy in the modern societies. The cult of the individual, the rise of individualism, is something which is celebrated by modern societies, and it is held out as immensely positive as opposed to the collective, the rootedness or the collectivity that binds traditional societies. So, institutions like family or institutions like caste are said to be characteristic of traditional societies. Similarly, the third difference between tradition and modernity is about achieved and ascribed status. So, traditional societies are said to attribute a higher value to ascribed statuses, and achieved statuses are considered to be valued in a modern societies. So, therefore, traditional societies would give importance to birth, would give importance to what is inherited. Therefore, caste status is said to be an ascribed one, whereas an achieved status is said to be reflected in class status, which is more characterized in modern societies. So, therefore, a class status is supposed to be more universalistic, more positive than a caste status. The next aspect of difference is that traditional social orders are guided by the notions of sacred, by the idea of non-rational, while modern societies operate on the basis of ideas of rationality, calculation and science. There is a clear difference and there is a clear distinction, value laden distinction between non-rational and rational, as you can make out. A traditional society is characterized by a fatalistic orientation towards material and human environment, whereas a modern society is marked by mastery over mastery of human faculties over the natural environment. That means, in traditional society, human beings are afraid of nature, whereas in modern societies, human beings try to control nature with the help of technology. The next is the idea of an altered understanding of work. When one looks at traditional societies, family, workplace, residence, community are all said to be tied to each other, interminably tied to each other, interrelated, they overlap with each other in traditional societies. Whereas, in modern societies, there is a clear compartmentalization of the domain of the private and the domain of work, of the domain of the family and residence on the one hand and work on the other. The next is the difference between traditional and modern societies on the basis of authority structure. As far as the authority structure is concerned, in traditional society, authority rests on the senior people, on patriarchal figures, whereas as well as on men, older men. So, you have the example of patrimonial societies that Weber spoke of, while modern societies are characterized by an equitable distribution of power and a relegation of authority to the young, to the women and to a different generation than the older generation. The next aspect of the difference between traditional and modern societies is pertains to the realm of politics, whereby it is held in modern societies the relationship between citizens and governing institution is marked by kind of participation, consent, public accountability, etc. These are features of modern governance, whereas in traditional society it is marked by a sense of distance between those who govern, those who rule and the subjects. Now, what is the relation between tradition and modernity? Is there a relation? So, when we focus on Western society, scholars say that the traditional elements will give way to modern. I feel traditional affiliations will ultimately be transcended by modern forms of affiliation. Comparative studies also say that traditional features will disappear eventually as societies become modern. So, the traditional societies are urged to adhere and follow and emulate the values and traditions of modern societies. But and often comparative studies also say that tradition also exists in such societies because they are considered to be backward in their stage of development. They are considered to be lower, primitive, backward in the levels of development. So, therefore, an analytical gap develops between tradition and modernity, marked by an incompatibility of norms, of structures, behaviors, and often tradition and modernity is held to be conceptually polar opposites of each other, and this is upheld whenever the framework is used for applying to particular societies. So, the relationship is one of mutual exclusivity. The overlap is seen to be minor and it is seen to be disorienting. Therefore, the idea of societies in transition or transitional societies assumes that the existence of modernity and tradition are still at the two ends of the spectrum. It is still being negotiated. Now, this oppositional understanding of traditional and modernity stems from a feeling that the modernity of Western society is assessed by examining how traditional the traditional societies are. So, we are modern, we assess our modernity in relation to how traditional other societies are. This is because of a lack of in-depth knowledge about the non-Western society, which gives rise to such narrow research agendas, and it uses comparison as a standard form of measurement, but there is a normative dimension also in using such standards of measurement, where universalism, where modernity is upheld as the norm, and all what does not fit into that mold is considered to be backward. Often it is when we take resort to ideal types in assessing tradition and modernity, the latent features or the potential of each of these societies is often overlooked. So, the ideal types become very important, they become dominant, they color our imagination, and the alternative potential of both traditional and modern societies are generally overlooked. This form of analysis misrepresents modern society as being devoid of any traditional elements and traditional ones as devoid of any modern traits, thus emphasizing the duality of tradition and modernity rather than the interface, overlap, interrelation between these two concepts. For researchers who are implementing the ideal types in the study of tradition and modernity, the search remains pivoted around the discovery of the manifest and traditional values that fit into this model of tradition or modernity. So, therefore, negating the actual contextual reality of a particular social order obscures the lived experiences of people who live in these societies. As to what causes the flawed assessment of tradition and modernity, there are some reasons which lead to this kind of a flawed assessment. Now, one of the impression is that traditional societies are static. So, scholars feel that traditional societies are very slow to change, they are insulated from change, they are not open to modern processes, and it is until the modernization processes commence in such societies, they remain very slow to change. Similarly, when you have a consistent set of norms which continue to define traditional cultural repertoire, that is, what is overlooked in this kind of a flawed understanding is that tradition is also plural, and traditional culture is defined by very set norms and values. The plurality of tradition is overlooked. Another reason for the fallacy fallacious relationship between tradition and the relationship between tradition and modernity is the displacement of old tradition by modern changes. Now, it fails. Now, the feeling, the attitude is that traditional societies fail to adapt to creative or modern traits, institutions, etc. Now, actually this is not true, but the understanding is that when we function through ideal types, we adhere to those ideal types without considering what is actually real. The other reason for misrepresenting this relationship is that the ideas are considered as oppositional. So, the possibility of a harmonious coexistence of such oppositional ideas is somehow not explored enough. The other feeling, another aspect which leads to a kind of a flawed understanding is that modern processes is said to weaken tradition, and instead of considering the fact that modern processes shape traditions just as traditional processes shape modern institutions, the overlaps and interlinkages are not explored enough. One does not necessarily overpower the other. Let us talk about what are the ways in which tradition and modernity overlap. Now, the overlap will be shown through certain examples, but what is generally going to be explored here is that the capacity of new and old institutions to coexist with each other through mutual adaptation than through conflict or an erasure of one or the other. In case of tradition and modernity, we see an admixture of how both emerges and how each derives support from the other rather than a kind of a dichotomous relationship. So, let us discuss the Indian caste system. If one were to look at the Indian caste system as a form of a traditional social order, as it has been written about in several texts, is that caste remains impervious to social mobility and social change. But M. N. Srinivas has shown how Sanskritization, the process of Sanskritization has been a historical process, which tells us that the middle orders of caste allows mobility, though the positions at the two end, the upper and the lowest position, are strict and rigid, but the process of socio-cultural mobility exists within the caste system. Mobility, as you know, is also facilitated by the development of novel transport and communication routes, as well as through modern associational life, through written journals, etc. So, therefore, caste system cannot be seen only as a traditional institution, and there are several modernizing influences through which caste continues to play or continues to have a distinctive place in Indian society, in modern Indian society even today. Let us take another example of the Indian political landscape. Now, if one were to look at the Indian political landscape, it is ridden by different kinds of struggles around religion, around caste, around region, around economic groupings, etc. And also what matters are affiliations on the basis of village, on the basis of religion, etc., through which individuals and families are drawn into modern political institutions. If you look at the current, if you look at our democratic representatives in our democracy, you will see that caste, village, family, religion, all of these play a very, very important role in ultimately becoming a representative of the people. Similarly, if you look at D. L. Shade's characterization of caste, he says that the process of secularization of caste has begun, and it has ceased to be a ritual order, it has ceased to be a kin based order, and it has moved out of its ambit into which can be seen through the role of caste associations, caste associations which play a very important role in the public life of today. Similarly, caste associations also play a very important role in the political context of modern India, even as elections are planned, contested and won on the basis of caste. Let us talk about another case study of Indian entrepreneurship spirit, and here one would try and emphasize the absence of Protestantism and liberalism in the Indian context, whereby it was thought that India lacked an entrepreneurial spirit, and but Milton Singer and others have shown that the existence of the caste of Vaishyas, who are the merchant castes, tell us that India had a thriving business community. So, therefore, although we did not have Protestantism, although we did not have the similar kind of experiences of say Germany as Weber outlines, or of Europe as is evident in Weber's work, we have the emergence of a thriving merchant community in a traditional society like India, which tells us about the entrepreneurial spirit that it exists. Now, the other thing that you see in case of the Indian education system is that the Indian education system has been shaped by after the British left, it has been shaped by modern Western sensibilities. But if you look at the private life of the educated people, you will see that both the modern and the traditional coexist. What is the overlap experienced by the modern West? As far as the West is concerned, if you look at the economic relationships between the employees and the employers in the West, along with a kind of professionalism, there is also a similarity that one witnesses in terms of the traditional patron-client relationship that we saw in India. Economic relations are not only on the professional relations, but they are also enduring because of the nature of expectations, the nature of trust, the values that are associated with people, the dependence that individuals have on each other, and ensure through these processes and values that work is done even in a modern institution. Now, if you look at America, for example, traditional forces of influence like local history, ethnicity, race and others have a very strong influence on the political behavior of the Americans. And even in their forms of democratic participation, you see these aspects playing a very important role, exercising an enduring influence despite the modernity of the American society. Therefore, we can say that modernity does not completely erase the traditional elements. Even in modern societies, primordial relations continue to exist and influence modern institutions, modern organizations, modern associations and so on. We will try and sum up the module by highlighting some of the important points. The first point that we need to remember is that it is erroneous, it is wrong to assume that the relationship between tradition and modernity is solely characterized by conflict and opposition. This is a result of the misrepresentation of the relationship between tradition and modernity, and it is based on certain ingrained understanding of what is tradition and what is modern, and without assessing the situated realities that is seen where tradition and modernity is seen to function. Now, many non-Western scholars have dispelled this view of tradition and modernity by acknowledging the fact that there are multiple modernities. There is not one modernity, but there are multiple modernities, and it is only when we recognize that there is internal variation within the overtly traditional or overwhelmingly modern societies, then we can do justice, we can encounter those features that are present in each other. So, on our part, what is required is an empathetic understanding of the concepts and the way in which they manifest themselves as social reality in any society. Thank you.